Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone in many parts of the world, especially for speakers. Yeah, like Istries mentioned, in Europe and America, I appreciate your effort for this webinar. And then welcome to the day 2 of the webinar of Unlocking Private Investment in Sustainable Infrastructure in Asia, Lessons from Central Asia. So today we will have 2 sessions with 4 papers to be discussed, and we will also listen to country presentation from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. But before that, we will have our keynote from Dean of ADBI, Professor Tetsushi Sonobe. He will talk about private investment in infrastructure in different development phase. Dean Sonobe, he is a Dean and CEO for Asian Development Bank Institute. He obtained his PhD in economics from Yale University and BA in economics from University of Tokyo. And before joining ADBI in April 2020, Dean Sonobe served for 6 years as Vice President of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, in Tokyo. So he also served as a Professor of Economics at Tokyo Metropolitan University and GRIPS. And Dean Sonobe is a recipient of Nikkei Book Publication Prize and the Masayoshi Ohira Memorial Prize, and a founding board member of the Japanese Association for Development Economics. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Dean Sonobe.
Thank you, Dina, for kind introduction. This is Tetsushi Sonobe speaking from home. I'm very happy to talk to you, one of the keynote speakers. I feel very honored. My talk is about infrastructure investment and finance. I'm not a specialist in infrastructure investment. I'm just one of the field work type development economist. But ADBI is really encouraging the research on infrastructure. Okay. So, yeah, let me start by talking about my predecessor, Professor Naoyuki Yoshino. Many of you must know something about him, or some of you have met him in person. So he has made several significant or many significant contributions to knowledge. And most relevant to this workshop is his argument on the use of spillover tax in infrastructure investment finance. This picture is not clear. But by the way, please do not misunderstand me. I'm not speaking in memory of the professor. He's alive. Actually, he is participating in this workshop, and he will be a keynote speaker tomorrow. And then this slide illustrates his argument. So starting from this circle, quality infrastructure investment, which can be defined as infrastructure investment that contribute to achieving sustainable development goals. So the contribution could be direct or could be indirect through the impact of infrastructure investment in income generating activities, and then income increase, and then the education become better, or sanitation, and those things become better, and the people may use energy in a more efficient way, so that sustainable development goals will be more likely to be achieved. And then in order to increase quality infrastructure investment, then the private sector should be encouraged to contribute more. Then in order to encourage them to invest, then the rate of return must be higher. So for that purpose, the government can share some part of the increment of the tax revenue that comes from the increased income. Oh, by the way, I should use maybe pointer. Yeah, can you see the pointer? Okay. So the increased income and the increased tax revenue, and the part of that increase can be shared with the landowners and the investors. So repeat the same argument. So to motivate landowners and investors to contribute more to quality infrastructure investment, the government should increase the rate of return to their investments by sharing with them the increment of tax revenue that arises from the spillover effects of the quality infrastructure investment on the various kinds of income generating activities in the locality. So this argument has been well received. For example, yesterday, the keynote speaker, Professor Ramin Jahanbegloo, also mentioned this argument, and many people are talking about this, this way of public-private partnership with spillover tax. And then, but the question arises as to whether it is the only or best way to unlock the private investments in infrastructure. Now, of course, it is not the only one, as the many studies presented in this workshop clearly indicate. There are some other ways. And then which form of public-private partnership is better than other would depend on circumstances. And another question arises as to whether it works well anywhere and anytime, like panacea. Maybe it's not like panacea, but maybe unlikely to work in some circumstances. Then, so these things are not yet confirmed, but maybe very likely. So then what I want to know is how does the relative performance of different forms of public-private partnership in infrastructure development depend on the development stage of the locality in question. Okay. So let me start from a very simple example of the underdeveloped remote rural areas. Farmers in such places are poor because they are engaged in the subsistence agriculture, not producing cash crops. They cannot do so because large market in large cities are very far and the infrastructure is very poor and they don't have good transportation services. So for peasants, it's difficult to finance infrastructure investment or coordinate among themselves to build infrastructure because of the spillover effects, free riding, and the big fixed cost. But in the case of plantation, producing tea, coffee, rubber, those things, this kind of thing is not a problem because the investment in the invest, construct, and maintain roads within the plantation, the road to market, and the other infrastructure. The benefits and the profits from these things are all appropriated by the plantation owner. So there is no spillover. And then they can easily, there are plantation companies willing to invest in the infrastructure. Okay. So no need to have to use a spillover tax. And then, by the way, the cost of the purchasing land, acquiring land will be very low because the land, this kind of thing, it's no other use. So land price is extremely low. Then how about in the case when the city is not yet large? This is a kind of simple model of economic force behind the formation of large city. So if there are a larger number of dwellers who are also consumers and who are also workers, then the market for the products of farms is bigger, and also the abundant labor is available. So there will be more farms, and they will produce more diverse products in large quantities. And then that means in this place, the prices of goods and services in total lower than the remote places. So income higher, real income is available, and that will attract the more people to live in this place and work this place. So this is what is called agglomeration economies. And agglomeration economies is a kind of economies of scale and economies of scope. And then this kind of economies are external one, because people are benefiting each other, but they do not charge for that good effect. So larger size and greater diversity will help, but they do not pay for that. So in that sense, it's external increasing returns and scope economies. And then this is a map of railway in Greater Tokyo. People living in the Tokyo and the neighborhood can enjoy very comfortable train services. So they do not have to rely much on the truck transportation or taxis. And then interestingly, a large part of this Greater Tokyo has been developed by private sector. So these 6 lines are the railways of the former state-owned enterprise. Now privatized, but initially they are state-owned. But almost all other lines, including the subways in the real central part of Tokyo, are all private. And then even before the World War II, these commuter trains are developed by private company. And then these railway companies are actually developers. So they develop residential area, and then at the same time operating the railway. And also they have a department store in the terminal stations, and then the supermarkets and retail shops and hospitals and schools along the line. And then toward the end of the line, the other end of the line, there are beach or hot springs, those resorts. Why these companies operate so many businesses? Because there are kind of external economies and spillover effects. So here is railway. Then along the railway, as I said, supermarket, schools, and hospitals, and many things. And then in the urban centers, the end of the railway is a department store, the theaters, movie theaters. The other end maybe resorts are developed. And then they provide these services at low cost. Then they will have a mutual impact. And then what will happen? If they provide nice service at higher price, then the people consumers or the users of the railway wouldn't appreciate much. But if these services are provided at low price, then they appreciate. Then the popularity of residential area, which was also developed by this railway company, would go up. Then the land price and the rent will go up. So this railway company provides different services, and then not let the other companies provide these services, but their subsidiaries provide services. If needed, this railway company, purchase and merge those small businesses in the locality to make them subsidiaries. So by doing so, they internalize the external economies. So that's why this business was very successful. And then some large part of the suburb of Tokyo was developed by these railway companies, which are all private ones. And then instead of private company, can the local government do this? I think the answer is yes. Because if the local or central government is as creative the entrepreneurial as an innovative private company. But if the government officers didn't have good idea to how to develop this kind of barren area, which is not far from the central district of the big emerging city like Tokyo in maybe 100 years ago. But if they don't have a good idea how to develop this suburban area, then it will be better to let innovative private entrepreneurs to do business. But the cost of the kind of local monopoly, so the local government have to regulate those local monopolies in adequate way, or let the antitrust enforcement authority to watch this local monopoly. So the situation and the mechanism is somewhat similar to today's big tech companies or big global platforms. Similarity is they exploiting scale economies, scope economies, and which are external. Although we don't use the words spillover in this case, but maybe network economies. And then another similarity is private sectors, entrepreneurship and creativity made innovation, and then rapid growth possible. And also mergers and those things are happening. So the monopoly power is increasing. And if there are many subsidiaries, then it may be easy to shift profit from here to there. And then, tax authorities face a difficulty in collecting tax. So these are the kind of similarities. But of course, there is a difference, including the data privacy, which is a completely new issue. So we don't really have to rely on the government sector or the even the spillover tax kind of thing. Then how about the more developed situation? Like a large city is already severely congested. Then congestion must be reduced. How to reduce congestion of the large city? One is gradually expand the large city outside, but this will not be a solution. Just expanding the problem of congestion. So maybe build new cities in remote area, but if it's too remote from the existing one, then it's very risky and very difficult to have development, or it may take a long time to develop completely separate new city. So maybe the better strategy would be build satellites and then encourage some businesses which do not really have to occupy the central part of the large city to move out to satellites. And then also build a new city in between the existing large cities. So the solution is this. So this is what happened in Japan in 1960s. And then the big project of reducing the congestion was called income doubling plan. And then it meant doubling GDP in 10 years, but actually it became 3 times, so triple. Very successful. But in this case, problem is land price is very high already. So it's very difficult to purchase land because landowners in these places are expecting the urbanization, and then they expect the price of their land will go up and up and up. So they may strategically refuse the deal and then wait for the land price go up further and further. So the infra company or even the government may have difficulty in the purchasing land. So in this case, the trust bank, which is Professor Yoshino is pushing, So this may work better because in this case, rather than the purchase, but the renting and the leasing is, needed transactions. So then the cost is much lower. And also, if the government dedicate, oh, this place will be urbanized and they will be developed with lots of infrastructure investment, then the government can raise a kind of tax rate for real estate or fixed asset. So the motivation of the hold stick to the land becomes a little bit weaker. So in this system, so landowners will not sell, but keep holding land title. But they transfer the management or use right will be shifted to trust bank, and then which will allow the infra company to use the land, and then instead landowner receive dividend. So this will be much better than this selling transaction because the initial cost is lower. But if spillover tax can be used to increase this dividend and also the investors' rate of return, then the landowners and the investors will be more encouraged to contribute infrastructure investment. That's Professor Yoshino's argument. Okay, so what I want to say is this. I think that the country case studies and the case studies of particular type of infrastructure investment in particular country or the cross-country comparisons, these studies are all very useful. So we should continue these kinds of studies. But we also should seek the next step toward the kind of unification or more unified understanding of what kind of policy or what forms of public-private partnership works better under what conditions, in what cases. So, I just talk about an attempt to create such a hypothesis along the possible axis of development stage. But I don't know, this development stage is useful axis or not. So there may be more promising way. So we need the trial and errors. But anyway, not only conducting this type of studies, but also we may try to ask what kind of public-private partnership and what kind of government incentives. So in what cases, so kind of unified hypothesis should be established or developed and then empirically tested. So, and also I'd like to emphasize that when we consider the performance of different types of public-private partnership, Professor Yoshino's argument of spillover tax can be a very good reference point. And then also I'd like to emphasize to conclude, ADBI is very happy to encourage and help this kind of research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. I write some points. I mean, like, yeah, as you know, this private financing is the heart of our book topic, and then and the externalities, agglomeration of economy of scale that you explained. That's for sure we will consider that in our book, and then the experience of Japan, that how Japan always like for private investment for their infrastructure investment since the beginning. So this and we also have a lot of country experience too about China many other countries besides Central Asia, so that we can use that unified understanding how to implement this spillover tax revenue. So thank you very much, Dean Sonobe. And then I think for that, we continue to the next session. But before that, please switch on your video. We will take another photo session. So please, my colleague Derek will take screenshots for all of us. Derek, give like sign 1, 2, 3.
Okay, is everyone ready? Okay, 1, 2. Okay, ready? 1. Oh, sorry, still turning on.
Waiting for people.
Some colleagues are trying to turn on their videos, Derek. You could just maybe wait a few seconds. I see Professor Young Ho is somewhere in a lake.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we'll take one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So we will continue with our next session, the session 3. The moderator for this session will be Dr. Hans Holzacker, Chief Economist of Carrick Institute. Before joining the Carrick Institute, he has 30 years of experience as an economist, focusing on transition economies and held many positions. I just mentioned the recent one here because there's a lot. That lead economist for Central Asia with the EBRD, based in Almaty, Kazakhstan, chief economist at Golomb Bank in Mongolia and ATF Bank in Kazakhstan. And he also teaching at the Turan and Naxos University in Almaty. He holds a PhD in sociology and an MA in economics from the University of Vienna. I think with that, I will give the floor to Dr. Hans, please.
Many thanks, Nila. Hello, everyone, again. So welcome to session 3 of the workshop with the title Assessing the Impacts of Investments and Future of Sustainable Infrastructure. And we will have 2 blocks in session 3 with 1 speaker and 1 discussant and a Q&A session in each block. According to the agenda, we have 10 minutes for every speaker, discussants, and the Q&A session. I'll introduce the speakers and discussants in each block separately. So let me now begin with the first speaker, Iskandar Abdullayev, and the first discussant, Nicolas Bourchou. And let me introduce Iskandar Abdullayev first. Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev joined the Carrick Institute as Deputy Director in June 2019. From 2013 to 2019, Dr. Abdullayev worked as the Executive Director for Central Asia of the Carrick Regional Environmental Center. Prior to joining Carrick, Dr. Abdullayev was a regional advisor for Germany's transboundary water management project in Central Asia. And he was also at the German Society for International Cooperation, so it's known as GIZ. He worked also at the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn in Germany, and as a researcher at the International Water Management Institute, which is headquartered in Sri Lanka. Dr. Abdullayev holds an MSc and a PhD degrees from Tashkent Institute of Irrigation and Agriculture, mechanization engineers in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Dr. Abdullayev conducted part of his PhD work also in the US and participated in training and education programs in a whole lot of countries, including Israel, the USA, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. He has over 25 years of experience in water management, water institutions, environmental activities in Afghanistan and in 5 Central Asian countries. Discussant will be Nicolas G.A. Bourchou. He is the founding principal of Renaissance Urbain. Nicolas G.A. Bourchou is a founding principal of Renaissance Urbain and a strategic advisory, which is a strategic advisory office specialized in developing and emerging countries' urban systems and was established in 2010. He's also a former senior advisor to the president of the Paris Île-de-France region, and he has created the think tank Grand Paris Alliance for Metropolitan Development. He is a co-chair of the T20 Saudi Arabia Task Force on Infrastructure Finance, as he was during the T20 in Japan. He advised the U20, the G20 engagement group for cities with a focus on innovation, inclusion, and nature-based solutions. And he is also a fellow of the Global Solutions Initiative in Berlin. So with no further ado, Dr. Iskander, please, the floor is yours, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Hans, for very good introduction. I think it helps me to also explain that my background is a water person, so I learned on infrastructure financing from interaction with my colleagues. So my presentation is devoted how financing of water infrastructure in Central Asia is going, what are the problems. But let me start to mention that my co-author is my colleague, Mr. Shahbaz Ahmedov from Karag Institute as well. We together try to understand first the role of water in the region. You know, most of you are aware that the water is key driver in the region for socioeconomic development in Central Asia because of climate, because of historical developments, and also region's geography. However, what is very limited resource, it's almost non-renewable. I will come to it and show his numbers that whatever we consume is almost reaching the amount of water which we have in the region. Another is that, you know, and since 1991, countries became independent, and access to water resources became a key economic, social, and political priority for each riparian state, be it for the irrigation, be it for energy development. Therefore, I think if we continue the state now, currently, the business as usual, there will be huge competition between states and also sectors for the water. Therefore, I think that we have to understand that water is a critical element to enhance economic development in the region. It could be also a limit. As I told you that from almost 120 cubic kilometers of available water from 2 big rivers in the Central Asia, where 5 states are members, 90% is already utilized for different uses. On top of it, you know, recently Karag Institute also conducted the climate research, which shows that water shortage will be equaling to 8 to 10% of current water users. And also lately, last maybe 15, 20 years, we also observed that per capita consumption is dropping. It's dropping tremendously from being 2,500 cubic meters per year to 1,400. This is a huge decline, almost 50%. Therefore, if we want to keep the efficiency and access to water resources in the region, we have to also look at not only the governance and also the management, but also infrastructure problems in the water sector. We can see that this is from this map, and you have seen many times this map, which shows that a lot of water systems in the region are linked, they are transboundary nature. So whatever we talk about the water management and water issues in the region, they are really linked with each other, bringing economies together, but at the same time increasing competition between different sectors for water resources. This map illustrates how much interconnectedness in the water also brings interconnectedness in actions on water infrastructure. if we see the current uses of water for the different purposes, if try to analyze its distribution, you see most of the water use is in agriculture. It changes from 65 to 95% of water goes to the agriculture. So whenever today we're talking about water infrastructure, by talking the water management, we always meant about agricultural water management. And if you see that the water users in the region, you see huge water distribution between countries are unequal based on their historical location and population. But also one thing is still very important to mention that there is a huge distribution of difference in per capita water use among regions, countries. But if we come back to the infrastructure, yesterday World Economic Forum's Sustainable Development Impact Forum mentioned that water is one of the least mentioned and also included into priority the sector. Actually, infrastructure investment in water sector is very low. But if you look, the whole demand for the infrastructure investment in the region is huge. It's almost 5 to 7% of GDP per annum. Therefore, I think the region is very hunger for the investment due to, of course, economic growth. The infrastructure could be a bottleneck, including water infrastructure. If you don't have sufficient water resources, if you don't deliver it on time, you will have problems. But also one should keep in mind that also the region's countries are becoming, having high levels of public debt, and sometimes it's reaching even more than 40% of GDP in average. And then major areas of the infrastructure investment so far have been transport, power generation. These two together makes almost 80% of investment in the region. The water sanitation so far have been maybe very small, like a 5 to 6%. Therefore, infrastructure investment needs emerging. We need to rehabilitate existing infrastructure or extend build new ones. If we look there, for example, the quality of infrastructure, you see very good levels of infrastructure on electric power transmission, also electrification rates, efficiency of air transport services. But if you look the water sector or reliability of water supplies, it's less than 50% reliability. So it means the problem is that by having outdated or unextended water infrastructure, you are not delivering services which you should. And this, of course, leads to unequal water distribution. In some places in the region, you see also droughts, which I can call them man-made, not the climate change based, but man-made because of the infrastructure status. So I think the one element which we have to pay attention when we are talking about water infrastructure investment, water sector is state funded and operated by state or semi-state organization fully. So almost all costs are covered by state and public funds. However, I think due to different reasons, infrastructure, human, transport, and technological needs of the water sector are inadequately funded. Some numbers shows that if you compare with 1991 numbers, in average, only 60% of the needs of the sector is currently funded. So it's not sufficient. Population is growing, demography is positive, and demand for water is increasing. And also delayed investments in water infrastructure, of course, led to inadequate conditions, and delivery of water to the irrigation and also water supply is not sufficiently covered by existing infrastructure. Also, one thing is very important, that in this region, mostly delay is in operation maintenance most. So inefficient and sufficient O&M financing leads to deterioration of the infrastructure in water sector. However, if we are talking about generally transboundary context, which is Central Asia, is here one of the reasons why delays in infrastructure, especially on regional infrastructure, happens, like hydro energy or irrigation, is difference between the upstream and downstream countries which have been in place, because there is also infrastructure deteriorating, and water management remains unchanged. Therefore, limited cooperation also limits access to international finances. Many countries and also private investment would be interested to invest into the water infrastructure at the transboundary level, but absence of the cooperation makes it not possible. However, things are changing. If, for example, currently since 2016, especially a situation in Uzbekistan improved seriously and countries as a region are coming together, it can bring a lot of benefits, including in water sector. For example, the opportunity cost which countries can achieve is almost $4.5 billion per annum if countries start to cooperate on water issues, if they invest properly into the water sector infrastructure at the transboundary level. So one of the
2 minutes left.
Yes, one of the understanding from analysis shows that state budgets doesn't cover all infrastructure needs in the water sector, and the private investments are limited or not absent. We need around 20-25 billion US dollars to invest to the water infrastructure, which is huge burden for the economies and budgets of Central Asian countries. Therefore, I think countries could really work on finishing some few things which are important to increase infrastructure investment. First of all, agriculture and land reforms have to be finished. This is unfinished work. So we have to decide what we will do with our land and water. And secondly, of course, high regulations in agricultural production systems have to be reduced. Land ownership have to be really streamlined. Also, we still think that the state should play an important role as a social stabilizer, which provides food, water security to the population. So regulatory role of state have to here. And also downside, I mean, we have to really release this tightly regulated system, reduce the roles of the state in areas of economic reforms. The introduction of public-private partnership, and in keynote speaking, Dean Snobby have clearly indicated that it was exactly that such a different solutions could help us to bring a more funding to the water sector. Of course, political commitment and enabling legislation. States should guarantee that the policy level involving the private sector into water investment into water sector. Stable investment climate, business opportunities should be created. Of course, government efficiency, like rationality and benefit over dollar invested, could have eventually improve the creditworthiness of the sector. Expertise, of course, state should, as a regulator, to bring business and investors to provide the financial, legal, and technical skills to deal the process. Last, I think I have said that the setting up multi-purpose water schemes in irrigated areas could be an option. So concessions of infrastructure and land around the irrigation infrastructure could bring the more private business. At the regional level, we see that Water Energy Consortium, which started discussing in mid-2000s in the Central Asia, in Amudara and Sirdere, joint financing and operation of transboundary infrastructure for benefit sharing. I think this is a good time for Central Asia to do and invest these options. Of course, economic framework should promote a cooperation and integrated planning among different sectors. I think nexus approach here we could see as in a solution. All in all, I think this is both a challenging and also a very good time for water sector to attract the public financing. It could be a solution of a region's huge problem with water resources. I stop here and will be happy to respond to questions if you have. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Iskander. Dr. Bashir, may I ask you to share with us your take on the paper and the topic? Please go ahead.
Sorry. So is it okay now? Yes, I think so. Yes, sorry. Thank you very much, Dr. Holsacker. Thank you so much, Dr. Iskander Abdullayev. It's quite difficult for me to come up as an expert, you know, saying what the pros and cons of the paper that has been shared by Dr. Iskander Abdullayev and his colleague from CAREC, because this is a well-documented policy paper. When you can see, when you look at the references, that the references are, most of them are the right ones, and the understanding there is no question about the overall understanding of the current situation and sort of the background, analyzing the background of the transformations and of the hurdles and the gridlocks in addressing correctly infrastructure transformation, and especially water infrastructure transformation in the region, has been more than well positioned and well analyzed. So I think this is one very strong aspect of the paper that was also reflected by what Dr. Abdullayev has just shared with us minutes ago in his presentation. So I will not comment the paper, line by line or chapter by chapter. We can further discuss about that. I would just like to maybe point to some issues which I find were not so much developed in the paper, and raise them as potential areas to bring in the document a number of maybe more precise analysis, or maybe further options for policy recommendations. The first one, and it will be related to what we discussed yesterday, no surprise, and of course, the issue of water in Central Asia, absolutely, as you pointed out, is mostly related to the agricultural sector. When you look at the statistics, even the statistics of now, there is no doubt. However, when we are talking about pathways for change and unlocking private investments, I would say that the transformation of water infrastructure in cities, I'm thinking here, and I would say contrary a little bit to what I advocated for yesterday regarding the fact that we should not only talk about major cities, but also second and third tier cities. Infrastructure transformation in large cities could trigger a number of governance changes that could then further be applied as a case for changing policy frameworks. And this has not been explored at all in the document. I'm just taking the example, for example, of water management in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, with over several months long, or even more than a year long negotiation between the government of Uzbekistan and a number of partner countries with companies. Now there is a concession system that has been established and granted to a French company, Suez, after long and tight discussions, but which I would say, maybe to the surprise of both parties, has ended up rather successfully. Now the work needs to be done, but at least the contractual arrangements have been made, and similar discussions have been taking place about other cities. I'm thinking here about Samarkand, which is notoriously subject to floodings and etc. And I would say even worse condition of the water distribution network than Tashkent, but also in Bukhara, etc. And you can see also when you go to Kazakhstan, that I brought up yesterday, the example of Akkol. Water management systems are really part of this approach to smart cities or modernization of cities infrastructure. So I won't insist too much here, but I think this is not the case saying that cities should be considered equally as agriculture, etc., because in terms of masses and in terms of amounts of investments and people directly impacted and part of the gross domestic product that is concerned, there is no point for discussion. But probably what is taking place now in cities, because it involves governments at the highest level and it is part of ongoing economic reforms, could serve as a cradle to expand reforms in rural areas and regarding the agricultural sector. So that's one point. And then, of course, it would have to be researched how and etc. The second point I would like to highlight, it is mentioned, of course, in the document, but if we are thinking about ways to support transformation, to accelerate transition towards some aspects of market economy, including unlocking private investments. Here, there are common issues in the region, and I'm thinking that in an article about water and water infrastructure, there should be at least a paragraph or a paragraph or a page addressing specifically the issue of the Aral Sea region, because it's not just a matter of drought. So the case is well known, but since 2018 and the creation of this multi-partner trust fund under the United Nations by the government of Uzbekistan, you can see also that discussions between Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, this conversation about water has been sort of relaunched also at the highest level regionally. Of course, then it's different to sort of relaunch this discussion than to implement really solutions on the ground that can provide the right responses. But the multi-partner trust fund, and yesterday in the General Assembly, the president of Uzbekistan readdressed the issue, readdressed the question of the Aral Sea, called for a special resolution about that. And it's not just about planting the Aral Sea bed, it's also about a number of environmental innovation technologies that are being pushed at this moment around the Aral Sea region and the basin of the Amudarya and the Sea Darya, mostly led by Uzbekistan, but also with Kazakhstan and as part of regional cooperation. Here also, I think, in 1 minute. Here also, I think there is not only room for improvement, but this could be a catalyst for actual changes in this regard. The last, and this should be also emphasized a little bit more precisely in the document. And the last 2 points, if you allow me, I would just like to also maybe if this paper should have its full force, the references to the analysis of the effects of climate change and the rising drought maybe should be emphasized a little bit more as not water systems, but irrigation systems, modernizations, drip systems, and etc. Could be further also highlighted, because of course unlocking investments in this sector, as is very well highlighted in the paper, is more than necessary, but probably part of the responses could come from the agricultural sector itself, not from the water management sector itself, not to mention, of course, the different legal regimes of managing water, which is a common good, and this will be very difficult to change overnight. As a conclusion of this sort of rapid overview of this very good document, I would just like to take a quote from the end of the document. One option, two quotes, one option for sustainable water financing could be the changes in the agriculture sector. This is mentioned in the paper, but I think the paper could maybe explore a little bit more what is happening now and the way forward in transformation of the agriculture sector. And this important passage, paragraph before the conclusions: otherwise, infrastructure deterioration combined with increasing impacts of climate change, land degradation, and demographic growth. I would add also a tendency of people going to cities would give rise to economic, social, and environmental risks and costs associated with dealing with water supply in Central Asia in the long term. And I think this is the really important common background, which means that transforming water system management is really not a luxury, but something that should be put much higher on the regional agenda in the coming 5 years.
Many thanks, Dr. Bashou. I open the floor now for questions. Please come forward with your questions in the Q&A block down here at the Zoom. And we already have a first questions by Alia Tankibayeva. Maybe I read it. So a question to Dr. Abdullayev: in case of public-private or private investment to agricultural water infrastructure, what would there be the possible effect on pricing, on water pricing? And also what would attract private investors?
Dr. Hans, sorry to interrupt. I could also assist you in allowing, for example, if Saiveli would like to speak, we could allow her to talk or allow him to talk.
Okay, let's do with the next question. This one I already asked, so maybe Dr. Abdullayev would like to answer the question. So the question was about the impact on water pricing and on attracting private investors.
Thank you. First of all, maybe I would like to thank Nicholas Buchol. Very good comments, I think useful, and also I would say I can undersign under each of these comments. What I could give very brief feedback to him: yes, you are right. Maybe changes are in large cities. It's happening in big cities, exactly concessions and handing over to private sector, water delivery reforms. I think every day you see some good move in urban water system, and I'm observing it, and I'm really happy that the French company will start work in Tashkent. We will see it an example. Then it goes to cities like Samarkand, Bukhara. Also in Kazakhstan, the same happens in Kyrgyzstan. But my point was that mainly, even last 30 years, this urban and rural water supply system have been witnessing quite okay numbers of investments still to keep this system work. But unfortunately, irrigation system received no or small investments, and that there is a big issue, because 50% of water of from Amudare and Sirdare is lost due to this inefficient irrigation system. So maybe for the urgency of both the climate change and also regional cooperation, we should think of how we can reduce these numbers. But I agree, I think the solutions may come from cities, and I am looking forward for these good examples. And I think in the paper we can really highlight these developments as well, and I consider it as very good comment. Second one is RLC. Yes, RLC is a big issue, and I think that there is also some turning points are happening. Instead of asking for money from international community, begging for money, now countries are taking measures which will, first of all, stop at least this deterioration further in the RLC region, but also trying to develop some kind of innovative approaches, economically based solutions, which could be actually triggering also changes in water sector. I fully agree. I think we can give. I am very closely working with this multi-trust fund and also observing their work. And yesterday, President's speech in the UN was also again paying attention. And countries also triggering a lot of cooperation. You're absolutely right. At least 3 meetings of heads of states of Central Asia included water in the high agenda. One area which we in the paper paid attention is that this opportunity cost. For example, this 4.5 billion is actually, if you invest in hydro energy at the regional level, if you invest to more water saving in the regional level, you gain a lot back to your economy. So I think this argument was there, but I think it's if not sufficient, of course, we have to add this RLC issue, and I happily accept this as a good comment. Effects of climate change. We recently actually released a separate paper where we highlight a lot of attention to how agriculture could adapt to the climate change by applying water saving technologies like drip irrigation in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Countries are subsidizing it already. So I think there is also good developments to include a mention. Last but not least, yes, you're absolutely right. I agree. Solution comes from agriculture sector. Until agriculture sector doesn't change, it is going to happen, because now quota for cotton is released. No anymore cotton quotas in Uzbekistan. Other regional countries are also trying to promote the water saving technologies. So I'm agree. These points are well, I think in the last version of paper we were reflected, but all in all, thank you for your comments. Very helpful, very good, and highlighting areas where we maybe didn't pay full attention. About the question from colleagues on this engaging private sector and water pricing. But unfortunately, the pricing system in Central Asia is nothing to do with economic argument. It's just coming from what you say, political agenda. And we have calculated that the irrigation service fees contribute only 10 to 15% of real cost of the prices. I think we have to go there step by step. And I don't think the solution that if we now put the high levels of prices for water, people will start paying and then investors will interest. I think it's not like this. First of all, collection rates will drop dramatically if we increase the irrigation service fee or water fees. And then we will have a lot of difficulties to collect it. Rather, step-by-step approach in introducing water pricing will be proper. For attracting private investors, we should find other ways. Like in a keynote speech, Dr. Snoby already indicated one potential area. But also we can really gain by increased productivity of agriculture, indirect gains for the investors. Directly just full charge of the water cost, I don't imagine if it could have a good results. This is my opinion, of course. There are the different competing ideas. For example, if you charge full cost, then the recovery cost will be quick and then investors will be interested. For my understanding, most of the water goes agriculture, and there is taxes, land taxes, and other taxes, and I think these are the mechanisms to really recover the cost of water sector. This is from my side, Hans. I'm sorry if I took long. I'm giving back you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Iskander. Dr. Bouchard, would you like to add anything on this question?
Not specifically on this question, but just adding that there are interesting reports from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the environmental performance reports, which have been recently updated in a number of countries in the region, in Kyrgyzstan, in Uzbekistan, which allows also to look back for what happened in the last 10 years. This is done every 10 years. And there are specific also analyses which are rather detailed, devoted to water systems and water system transformation. And this could be also adding sources of relevant information as a background for the paper.
Okay, thanks a lot. We are a bit out of time, but nevertheless, let's have two more questions. The one, I think, Professor Yoshino, you had one question.
Yes, thank you very much. Related to how to increase the rate of return for water infrastructure. As you mentioned, irrigation, which can make agricultural sector much more productive. Then the tax revenues will automatically increase because their output will increase and labor employment will increase. Spillover tax revenue can be computed. Then part of those spillover tax revenue could be returned to water supply company. So it is not charging another tax, increased tax created by water irrigation and sanitation, and then that can expand much more private participation into the market. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have another question from Darius David, which is related a bit to the first question we had on pricing. And the question is, what can make water more profitable to recover costs? What will bring in PPPs for sure? And if I may, I add this is similar to the question I had myself, and this is also related to pricing. So one thing could be done to recover costs would be to raise tariffs on water. However, this is neither very popular nor everyone can afford it. So what's your take on this? How could water be more profitable, and what would be the source of financing?
Dr. Hunt, sorry for interruption again. We do have one question from the floor. A hand is raised. Yaqub John Saivali, you would like to ask a question if you allow it.
Sure, go ahead. Sorry for overlooking it. Go ahead, please, with your question.
Please, Yaqub John Saivali.
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте, дамы и господа. Я Хубджони Сайвали из Министерства экономического развития и торговой республики Таджикистан. Мне очень понравилось выступление господина Искандара. Я хочу отметить, что на этой теме у нас тоже есть много ресурсов, водных ресурсов, и хочу обращать внимание на Республику Таджикистан тоже.
That's just Dr. Han, sorry for interruption again. Just one tip for the colleagues who would like to listen to such questions in English. Since we are panelists, we are on off. If you look at this globe, the translation part, so if you would like to, for example, listen to this translation, you will need to go to the English channel. So Dr. Iskander speaks Russian, so no problem. For other colleagues, please make sure that you go to the English channel so you can get the interpretation. Dr. Hans, sorry.
Thank you, Hans. If you allow me, I will quickly try to address. Professor Yeshina, thank you. It was not a question, I understand, it's suggestion, and I absolutely agree.
Yes.
That indirect taxing, spillover tax effects, distribution of the taxes.
Это было просто предложение, просто.
In the local level.
Yes, please go up.
Yeah, I think this is good. I see it as in a solution, and we could have also think of it. I think it's happening. Sometimes government takes an agriculture tax and distributes and invests back to irrigation and water system. It happens, but I think this needs a lot of systematic work and exactly transparency how it happens. It's a big chunk of money anyway comes from taxes and spillover taxes, not directly charging the water users. About the engagement of private-public partnership in water sector in Central Asia is emerging, and already we talked about this in cities, but in the irrigation sector it's still limited because of a lot of regulations, and it relates from agriculture, and government still is a social regulator and tries to make sure that equal access to water and not privatizing the systems, which is a big, huge, the irrigation systems, canals, and hundreds of kilometers with a lot of pumps, etc. Privatizing it is very difficult, but public-private partnership is possible. In the paper, we have shown a few areas, like at least delivery services and operation of some infrastructure, multi-purpose water use, not only for irrigation, but also some small emerging industries in the rural areas. These are the options, and still could be tested. But in rural, in the cities, it's easy, because I think operators could be given in a concession, and then like an example of Tashkent have given. These are the examples of emerging. Let's see, because there is not only good regulation needed, but also good governance. You have incentives for private companies come in and operate it. For example, if you suddenly break the contract or rules which is written in the contract, it will have quite a disincentive. It's emerging. There is an examples in other countries where even in irrigation systems, especially in China, I have seen a lot of good examples how even irrigation systems, the public-private partnership is possible. About pricing, this is tariffs. This is the difficult part, because tariffs already, for example, on the water supply is increased every year in Central Asia. In each city, you can see at least once a year, you will have renewed the tariffs which are higher than last year. And Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other Central Asian countries have plans to increase the tariffs step by step and to cover at least to 70 to 80% of cost to recover. But the tariffs also related, and not tariffs, but the collection rates of tariffs are related to service quality. Service quality is not good. So delivery of water not regular, it's irregular. As I said, irrigation service fees is the same. If you do not receive water, there is a reluctance by water users to pay for these services. So I think the tariffs are increasing, but also reliability should increase. And here we come in an infrastructure question. Because with bad infrastructure, which is dilapidated and it does deliver and a lot of losses, you actually cannot provide good services. So I think this is really like the circle. You have to cut here. Either you have to start with setting reliable tariffs, which are really could be paid and afforded, but also at the same time improving the infrastructure. Without such a, if it does not go together, only increased tariffs doesn't really work. Actually, reluctance is very high, especially in irrigation. I know in municipal water, collection rates are okay, 80 to 90%. But in irrigation, it's sometimes 30 to 20%. Very low. Because if you don't deliver water, people don't pay. So this is on the tariffs. And the comment from colleague from Tajikistan about the resources of Tajikistan. Yes, two countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, are water towers of Central Asia. And they have a lot of huge potential, of course, for the, first of all, for hydro energy, but also delivering to the region good and reliable water. So I think the joint work of the countries could help to utilize a lot of resources which region have, and efficiency could be increased, and also infrastructure could be improved. This requires a lot of joint work and coordination. Lately, this is improving. Actually, the last 2 years, we see a lot of good cooperation going on. Working groups set between Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. So these are the working groups are really developing very good ideas. I think now next step, we should make it sellable to the investors. Not only the big donors like the World Bank and ADB, but also try to engage the private investment. I think these are the, my takeouts from the questions and responses. I will be very happy on the individual way also contact and talk to colleagues.
Many thanks, Dr. Iskander. Let's cooperate. And even so, we are a bit out of time, Dr. Bouchard. And then we have one question from Dina Ashkalieva. And then we should wrap up this part of the session. Yes. And please go ahead, Dr. Bouchard.
One quick remark here also, the paper draws a lot on MDBs and international financial cooperation. I think what could be explored, maybe not in this paper specifically, but to address the issue in agricultural transformation and especially encouraging sustainability approaches with water management, two things. First, addressing specifically through the paper the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the SDG on water, because this is getting part of the portfolio of policy making of the countries nationally. Second, the banking system. The banking system is evolving and being transformed constantly. But you know, for example, in Uzbekistan, the case of rural development banks, or the case of this big bank, Kishlok Kirilish Bank, for example, and how step by step it has been cooperating with the other banking institutions, including multilateral development banks like ADB or others. Those banks could be also drivers to support funding for small and medium-sized companies and enterprises in rural areas, including agricultural companies, and how this banking system is being organized and how it supports local activities and local communities through loans and through the management of deposits, etc., is also a way to encourage a flow which is small at the moment, but a flow of investments of settlements, villages, communities, small or medium-sized businesses in the rural areas that will also be players in overall transformation of the sector. So this is even one step further from directly addressing infrastructure, water infrastructure transformation, but this really should be part of the equation also, I think.
Many thanks. Dina Ashkalieva, do you want to come forward with your question?
Thank you very much, Dr. Iskandar. Thank you for, especially, I agree with you about water tariffs. So I'm not specialist on water tariffs. I studied electricity tariffs. So that's like tariffs, I think in current countries, big problem, right? Because they're very low. And then people are discouraged from, let's say, in Japan and UK, they collect rainwater, and then they can install some things in shower or in toilet flush, so then you consume less water. So what would be solutions you suggest, how to incentivize these water efficiency things in current countries? Yeah, any suggestions?
Thank you. Very quick comment back. Yes, Nicholas, you are right. I think we should go from water incentive communities to water not incentive communities, which has a wide range of options, except only growing high water consuming crops, but also businesses, small businesses available in rural areas will turn the relay economy. But it's long-term vision. I agree with you that if this comes, then Central Asia will not be depending on water. Dina's question about water saving and water efficiency increase is multiple factors. One of the factors, of course, is tariffs. If tariffs are sensible, then of course people will also try to consume less water. But if tariffs are high, but still reliability is low, people will not really tend to save water, rather to capture water as much as possible in order to be able to use it whenever it's needed. This is the problem, because for example, farmer waits for water for 3 days and he tries to really feel that next 1 month he will not have water. So I think the reliability improvement is second. And third one, of course, role of the government. Example of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, when they try to provide subsidies. If farmer, for example, applies water drip irrigation in his field, actually a government takes part of the burden. I think this should also be, because this is the huge areas and big infrastructure. Only by only by farmers or water users, you cannot achieve application of high cost technologies. So I think these 3 areas. First of all, tariffs be in a good level, but at the same time, reliability of services or delivery of water must be. It's also related to infrastructure improvement, but also role of government, which have to provide some incentives to do this. This is from my side so far, but there are many other options. I think we could discuss it longer, because water saving is itself is big issue.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
At the end of my talk, I say, I agree, future in the Central Asia is not in water. It's less water use and more productivity of water. This is what I would like to deliver at the end. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for the interesting discussions. We are quite out of time. Let me come to the second part of session 3.
Dr. Hans,
Thank you,
please.
everyone. Again, I think Dr. Nila, over to you, right?
It's over to me, Dr. Hans. So thank you so much. This was indeed very interactive and it's very educative. And we learn a lot through the expert discussions and the presentations, and the 2 fascinating papers were presented and discussants. So with that said, I would like to introduce my my colleague, who's not so happy at the moment with me, because we have run out of time, a little bit over time. So this is Dr. Nila. He has been my colleague for a long time now. We've been working almost together for 2 years. So she is Senior Capacity Building and Training Economist at ADBI. Prior to joining ADBI, she served as Deputy Director for G20 Forum at the Fiscal Policy Agency Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. She also was Senior Compliance Officer in the Indonesian Financial Intelligence Unit, that I didn't know, Dr. Nila, and head of the subdivision of accounting compliance for securities and institutions in the Indonesian Capital Market Supervisory Agency. Now it's called a Financial Service Authority. She holds a PhD in economics from Victoria University, Australia, and MS in finance from the University of Illinois at Urbane champion United States. Dr. Neela, the floor is yours, and I hope you're happy with the time.
Oh, thank you, Ayub. Actually, there's a lot of message to me because the delay. So they also have some more schedule. So that's why I'm always happy. You know. So good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to session 4. As you know, my name Nella, and then Ayub already introduced me. I also one of the editors for this book. I will be serving as show moderator today. So as you listen and involved in the discussion since yesterday, we are aware that public spending on infrastructure is important to accelerate poverty reduction. So many types of infrastructure such as energy and infrastructure in general needs government intervention, especially for private financing. So the concept of smart infrastructure, smart cities should also be considered, and the government should also have a holistic approach to integrate physical and social infrastructure. So I also take note today how the government should expand about the water infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and how to stimulate growth coming from infrastructure. So there's a good discussion, and then we can go from there. So today we have we, as the author today, will explain about the main point of their paper. So they already have a full presentation online through Karat Institute e-learning website. So I hope that we can stick on time, 10 minutes for each. So here we have Professor Ming-Kuan Liu from School of Economics from Peking University. So before he joined Peking University in 2005, he was professor of economics at Hopkins Nanjing Center, Johns Hopkins University, and a lecturer and research fellow with University of Leicester and University of Cambridge. He received an MPhil from the University of Cambridge and DPhil from the University of Oxford. So he will share with us about China 3 models of local public financing for infrastructure investment. I believe his views about municipalities or local government infrastructure financing through agriculture model, leasing of the public land, and land financing model will be valuable input for our books. So I think I will introduce the discussion as well. Here we have Dr. Wawan Juswanto. He's been presented yesterday. He's a senior policy analyst and head of international tax working groups and Center for State Revenue Policy, Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance of Indonesia. He also worked before that, he also worked as special advisor to the Dean of ADBI and senior economist at Capacity Building and Training Department at ADBI. He's kind of like my predecessor. Yes, yeah, the position before me. So without further ado, I give the floor to Professor Liu. Professor Liu, please. Hello. Professor Liu, can you hear?
Yeah, right. Okay. Right. Now, I'll try to stay within the time limit. And I'm going to in fact speak on a theme, which is a maybe offside theme to the main theme of this conference. It's about local public financing, and it is about China. So let's get on with it. Derek, could you? Yeah. Now, just a few words on the motivation of the subject. Local developmental state. I think most of us know the literature on developmental state, starting with Geshinkron and so on, which basically argues that for late developers, for late industrializing countries, the state plays a very, very important role. And I think, in a way, upon close reflection, I think it is largely true. Even though we may say, oh, there are government failures, but we also have market failures. Anyway, now that's the developmental state. The concept here, I'm not advancing. I'm using is local developmental state. Developmental state, the central government is obviously important, but in fact, what we attribute to developmental state, a lot of that is actually done by local authorities, local governments, and so on. And that is exactly what has been happening in China. Now, next slide, next. I think I'll end the next. Now, importance for infrastructure investment. I think we have been speaking about that for this is second day already, so I don't want to develop that point further. Now, 3 models of local public financing in PRC. There are 3 models, of some importance, which I'm going to introduce to every one of you. Next slide, please, Derek. Thank you. Now, a rough timeline. The first development, the first local public financing model is actually some time ago. Now, it is based on Chinese agricultural collectives, which span roughly for 2 decades, 60s and 70s, and it is sometimes called the commune because it's a 3-tier structure. But basically, I'll make no distinction between the commune or agricultural collectives as I speak. Just agricultural collectives, maybe that's better. Now, that's for 60s and 70s. And then, of course, towards the end of the 70s and early 80s, we had agricultural reform, which dismantled the communal system, agricultural collectives, and we were back to private farming, essentially, with one important difference. Land is still collectively owned. Land is not yet, or has always been collectively owned or publicly owned ever since 1949, when People's Republic of China was established. So land is still collectively owned or publicly owned, although farming is private now. And starting in 1994 until now, we had a local public financing model, which is sometimes often referred to as land financing. We use land, public land. We use land to lease to agents, economic agents, which need the land for proceeds, which are then used to finance development, including public infrastructure investments. In fact, mainly I would say public infrastructure. You all know that China is has been well known for its infrastructure. It's infrastructure leader, so to speak, in the world, and that is also that's certainly true in China domestically. Now, Model 3 is not yet in wide practice at the moment, but it's going to be important in the future. I explain why. Next slide, please. Now, local public financing under the commune, so Model 1. Next slide again. Okay. Now, this is perhaps the table, which summarizes everything. I'm not going to go back to the financing, the nature of financing, the incentive system, the incentive structure, because that's going to be very long and complicated. But what I'll just say that, well, physical infrastructure investment in the rural areas, well, rural and farm roads, irrigation, it's here. Irrigation stations and the canals. We were talking about irrigation a moment ago. Farm drainage ditches, farmland consolidation, which is about plot reconfiguration and leveling, and farm machineries. Well, if we are going to mechanize farming, then obviously you need farm machineries and so and other. Now, if there are these investments, you could split the cost of these investments into 2 components. One is labor, the other is non-labor. Now, the non-labor part was actually made by what is called accumulation fund of the agricultural collectives. Now, the labor component was paid in terms of work points, which would entitle the members to receive an additional payment from the collective. So it was all done by collectives. It was all done without government, without much of, if any, without really a significant government contribution. Now, in fact, the same thing also was responsible for social sector investment or social infrastructure investment, like building, manning and running schools, building village clinics, manning and running of them, even to the extent of basic social protections and so. That was also, you split the cost into two components, labor and non-labor. Non-labor part was met by welfare fund of something called the welfare fund, and the labor part was again paid in work points. Now, next slide, please. Okay, now what is all that was about? Well, this diagram was actually taken from by me from a study on Taiwan. Taiwan went through the same thing. Farmland consolidation. What was that? Farmland consolidation is just only one component of the infrastructure investment under the collectives in China. Now, but it's a very important part. Now, what is farmland consolidation all about? Well, you see the difference. On the left panel before consolidation, right panel after consolidation. In fact, in Japan was the forerunner of all this. Japan also underwent extensive farmland consolidation. In fact, Taiwan learned from Japan. And China also, there was a lot of mutual learning there, except the financing mechanism was kind of different. In Taiwan, that was, well, anyway, I shouldn't go into that detail. Otherwise, I'm going to run out of time. Now, next slide, please. Okay, now land financing. Land financing is something which is in wide practice at the moment, and it has been responsible for, on average, national average, for something like 30 to 40% of local public financing. 30 to 40% local public financing or local public funds. You see the extent of that. Okay, next slide, please. Now, three key ingredients to land financing in China. First one, collective ownership of land, public ownership of land. If land is privately owned, you can't really engage in land financing. You can't use private land to lease for proceeds which you then spend on various investments, infrastructure investment being one of them. Now, the second ingredient, the public revenue gap for local governments after the 1993-94 fiscal reform. Well, there was that reform. Before the reform, if you split the Chinese total public revenue in China into 1/3 and 2/3, okay. Before the reform, central government component and the local government component. Before the reform, only 1/3 was for central government, 2/3 for local government. Now, when Prime Minister Zhu Rongji took over the premiership, then he thought, oh, that's not right. No, that's simply not right. We'll re-centralize public financing. So after the reform, only 1/3 was left for local governments and 2/3 went to central government. Okay. Now, local governments, however, the list of spending responsibilities got increasingly extended. Public health, education, social protection, etc., etc. That list will always get longer and longer. So you have only
you have 1 minute to conclude.
Okay.
Actually, I'm sorry.
Sorry, 1 minute of. Anyway, okay. So you have that. Then, local governments have a lot of spending responsibilities, but little financing. And then the central government say, okay, you can sell your land, you cannot sell. You can lease land for, to engage in land financing. You lease land to whoever wanted the land to collect the proceeds. And in fact, the central government would give every bit of proceeds to local governments. Before that, the central government also had a share. Okay, there was the straw pay mechanisms and so on, which is basically about making sure that land is leased at its market value. Okay, next slide, please. And next few slides, perhaps. Next slide, please. Now, okay, these are just about some details of what I said. Okay, next slide. 10 minutes is really very, very short. Okay, now property tax. Well, basically, at the moment, we are rapidly, especially in some localities, rapidly running out of the public land to lease. So what do you, for example, in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, so what do you do? What would local government have to do to make sure that they still have a stable revenue? Well, property tax. Property tax is not exactly spillover tax, but it's a very, what I have suggested here is very much based on UK system, which is going to tax the residents according to the properties they have at some rate. I have more discussions on the property tax and so on. Is my time up now, Nella? Okay, okay. I think I'll stop here then. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Liu. I think without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Wawan Juswanto. Wawan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Nella, for the opportunity. Thank you, Professor Liu. Thank you very much for the comprehensive analysis. I have enjoying reading your paper, and on the, I can say, this evolution of land use in China with regard to infrastructure investment, and by discussing and comparing the three constructing model of the local public finance. My understanding that this paper explains each of the model. First is about the agricultural collective, a model that household pooled and cultivate together or collective owned, and they share the burden and as well as the benefit, the profit there. And the second model, as also already said by Professor Liu, is about land financing. I think this is a very interesting topic. And generally is a practice of a local government to lease out the land legally on to economic agent and who needed the land, and for the agent have to pay some fee. And this second model actually come with the abolishment of the first model. And then there is a third model. My understanding is, I don't know, is maybe some region already implement this, and Professor Liu mentioned that proposed to use UK model for this property tax. I believe is about property tax. That's my review. Before others comment, I would like to make a comment and question to Professor Liu. First is my understanding there is a issue on land acquisition in many developing countries. For example, Indonesia, I heard from it in India, the land acquisition issue for the public infrastructure development become in some areas become an obstacle because in other country, for example, the private owns of the land, and then if the government want to build infrastructure, it's very difficult for the land acquisition. So in case of China, I know it's maybe not in your paper, but maybe you have an opinion or information about in case of China, is there any regulation on this issue, land acquisition for public infrastructure development, and how the government solve this problem if there is a problem? And my second question or comment is, you said in the third model you propose to use a UK model. So can it be implemented in China? I mean, what should the government of China prepare? For example, the regulation or I don't know, culture or something like that. So that's my comment, Nella, for Professor Liu paper, and I enjoying very much to read and learn from his paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wawan. You are very in time. So I think before I give to the floor, I think I let Professor Liu to answer Wawan first. I think this will be like many questions. I think Professor Yoshino, that's the topic his favorite. So if he's there, please raise the question. So I give the floor to answer Wawan first, and then I will give the floor to others later.
Thank you, Wawan. Very good question. Very good question indeed. Now, land acquisition. That's why, anyway, that's why I said collective ownership or public ownership of land is very, very, very important. It underlies everything. Without this, you simply can't engage in land financing. You can't use other people's land to to lease for proceeds which you want. Simply, it's not on. China have had public ownership of land. We make distinction between collective ownership and state ownership, but really there is basically no significant, no substantive difference. China have had public ownership of land since 1949, when we had land reform. Land reform just turn every piece of land into public ownership. And then although we had the agricultural reform towards the late 70s and early 80s, we didn't scrap collective ownership of land. We scrapped the commune system, agricultural collectives, and so on, but we didn't scrap public ownership of land. So ownership is still public, and that has meant that local governments, it has been quite easy for local governments to just to acquire land, to say, oh, I want this piece of land for whatever purposes. And well, there would be incumbent users, there would be local residents and so on. Well, local residents, then the local authorities would build them apartment blocks to move them into. Of course, also at the cost, at the expense of local governments. Local governments would then say, oh, in compensation, we'll give you so much, say, often on a monthly basis, so much on a month, as to compensate for your loss, for your loss, to make sure, basically to make sure that you have enough to survive. So that's basically has been the case. Now, in countries with private ownership, I think it's very, very difficult to copy. In fact, I wrote a report for UNECA, Africa. Now, in Africa, some countries actually still have this traditional common ownership of land. It's a land ownership of which is quite unspecified. There are traditional entitlements for local residents to use. So there is public ownership of land. Maybe in some African countries that could be the same practice could be considered. But in other countries, unless unless, say, in Indonesia, unless local governments have large public land, otherwise it would be difficult. Now, UK model, now, opposition to UK model has basically come from those the well-off people. Okay, those people who have invested in apartment blocks. Those people who have owned many. Okay. And if you begin to ask them to now pay a tax on every block apartment, every apartment you have, then they are going to pay. They will have to pay a lot. So opposition has basically been from these people, and regrettably, in fact, the number of these people is increasing. So opposition is getting stronger and stronger. So, but at some stage, I don't see any other way out. But this spillover tax, I think that's an interesting thing. But then I think in China, this real estate related wealth is almost all spillover, put it this way. It's just it happened so quickly. We are talking about only the what happened in the last 2 decades, really, last 2 decades.
Professor
At the turn
Liu,
of
if
the
you
century,
can
the housing prices were pretty low in China. Sorry, Nella.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, because there's a message to me that Professor Yoshino want to ask questions. So Professor Yoshino.
Okay, thank you very much. I cannot show my face, but I think land trust is very important in Asian countries. Land trust is landowners can own the land and lease the land to infrastructure companies for the developers. China has no problem of land ownership because it is all owned by the government. So when China wants to have some road, land is already owned by the government, so there's no problem. But Indonesia, Japan, India, hardest part of infrastructure investment is we cannot purchase land. So land trust was started about 20, 30 years ago in Japan. Japan has a very bad experience. High-speed rail was expected from Narita Airport to Tokyo, but 2 landowners opposed it to sell. Then we started about land trust. And in Indonesia, if I go to Bali, highway is constructed on the ocean because land acquisition was very difficult. And also the corruption is often associated with land acquisition. So land trust means bank is in between landowners and also infrastructure company. And India is going to start this land trust. Thailand has passed the law of land trust, so it is applicable. And I can show those laws in Thailand, and also India is proposed. If that can be applicable to all other of our Asian countries, then it will become much, much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yoshino. Professor Liu, you want to respond to that? Or maybe Wawan, if you want to.
Yeah, just quickly. Thank you, Professor Yoshino. It's nice to meet you again online, this time online. Yes, land is absolutely important. Well, if we are talking about infrastructure investment or building roads and so, obviously the first thing you need is land, you know. Without land, what do you to build on? You know, maybe off coast, coastal areas, and maybe as in Indonesia, it appears that, you know, some segments could be built on the sea. Professor Yoshino mentioned this Narita airport thing. I was told, you know, I was actually surprised. I was told that in Narita airport, even now, in the middle of it, there's still one household sticking it out, you know. That's why the Narita airport, the runway is so long. There is, you know, you'll notice that if you land there, you'll notice that there is a nice courtyard somewhere, you know, shielded by trees and so on there. And that's the household sticking out. Now, yeah, I think land trust, it's something I will need to study further. But thank you. Maybe how that could, but yeah, you know, in Hong Kong, I think the Chinese land financing practice was learned from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, of course, land is largely speaking privately owned. Maybe by a few real estate agents, but they also have a public land. You know, the government of Hong Kong has some public land, and in fact, the government of Hong Kong, to a large extent, has been using that public land to top up its revenue. So I don't know. Maybe in other countries, local governments may have some land, which you know, have control of some land, and that could be turned into financing resources.
Maybe Wawan, you want to response?
No, but I just want to listen from correct member countries. Is there any problem with the land acquisition, or I don't, because I'm not sure about the system. Maybe some of you can explain.
Yeah,
because it's correct topic.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think Dr. Iskandar or Dr. Professor Ronald Holtz, I think they are expert from correct countries. If you have some insight what happened about the ownership of the land in correct Central Asian countries, because like China, the implementation so good because there's a public land, but then in some countries, the land is privately owners. I mean, like on privately by people. So when they build the infrastructure, it's difficult to acquire that. So if there's a response from correct countries, Ayub?
Dr. Nila, certainly Dr. Iskandar could provide some insight, but what I would like to do right now, since we have I have the opportunity, I was one of the first probably providing written comments to Professor Liu. When I went through your paper, Professor Liu, what I recognized, I just opened the file right now, I could see my comments. I could recognize your you are the authoritative scholar, I would say, in this field. You know a lot. I felt this was some of the concepts you were introducing. I really felt that there's a need for more detailed explanation in the sense so we understand that as non-Chinese people trying to understand Chinese experience. So this was something I thought was abstract, and the good thing is that it actually drives, it provokes for more detailed information. And I would suggest that if you could just enhance some of those concepts you're introducing. And also I found the paper, of course, very good, but descriptive, mainly descriptive. If you could just bring in this analytical aspect of it, I would say that yes, for example, Din Yushino brought up this, you know, in China, for example, land is owned public, this is public land. So with that said, I don't want to just continue with that. I would just say that this paper was very good. It needs more detailed explanation and an analytical explanation, I would say. So Dr. Iskandar, if you would like to respond on the request that the moderator made.
Yeah, I mean, I understand because I'm very sorry I had the problems to disconnecting back. Land acquisition and land issues are quite a serious problem also in CAREC region. Actually, there is no clear ownership. You remember in my presentation also I referred to it that ownership of land still in most of the countries belongs to the government. Land acquisition, as also Professor Yoshino put it, in that it is quite in a critical area. It could create a lot of issues, problems, including corruption. So I think this problem of ownership of land still is unfinished job. Therefore, I think investment depends a lot how much and how good your land policies are really formalized. None of the CAREC countries, of course, doesn't allow full ownership. Like there is no market of land selling and buying, but in some countries, a good provision that you could put the land and for the development issues and ownership is clear, but in more countries, it's less clear. I think reforms also ongoing. In Uzbekistan, recently reforms on land ownership is going on, especially this boom of the construction. Kazakhstan came back a few times. I think this is still much better than in 30 years ago, but still not unfinished job. This is my brief feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Iskandar. I think we almost finished, and I think I have one suggestion. Ayub, you know, your topic is very interesting and very timely, especially for developing countries. Countries want to build infrastructure, but they also, the land acquisition is one of the big problem. In China, it's kind of like the case that you give is good to implement, but the situation in China may be a bit different with those countries. If you explain, like Ayub said, that's more detailed, so then countries can learn from that, and then they can find like technical, more like implementative policy to implement, so they can copy or mimic some policy, some strategy that China do in their country, and then adjust with their country condition. That's my suggestion.
Nella, could I just say a few words?
Okay.
30
seconds.
Before we finish this. Yeah. First of all, Isa, is that how I pronounce your name? Isa, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the very detailed comments. You know, it's really, really great. And I have revised the paper. I have tried, I think, more or less, you know, taking into account every suggestion you made. Even you know, you suggested give me a table, so I gave a table. So you see your contribution. Okay, thank you very much, Isa. And to Professor Abdullah, I'm not sure if I pronounce your name correctly, but all I want to say is keep your public ownership of land if it is still public. Please don't just privatize it as they did in Russia. This public ownership of land, this public land could be a very important source for your source of funding for your later development. Even though at the moment, maybe, you know, land price of that land doesn't seem to be worth much, you know, but at some future point, it could be turned into a very important source of funding. Thank you. And then Nella, thank you very much as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu, Dr. Wawan Juswanto, Dr. Iskandar, Professor Yoshino. I think with that, I conclude this this first speaker session, and then we will move to the second speaker, second author for this today, and he's Professor Muhammad Ayub Mehar. He's a professor and executive director of the Economic and Financial Policy Research Center in Ikra University, Karachi, Pakistan. He has been serving as economic advisor of the Economic Cooperation Organization, ECO Chamber of Commerce, for 3 years, and also Director General in the Federation of Pakistan Chambers of Commerce and Industry for 7 years. So here he will talk about the impacts of the pattern of financing on logistic infrastructure in CAREC member countries. So I can see that the objective of study to identify the effective mode of financing for infrastructure development and the test effect of quality and magnitude of logistic infrastructure on economic development. So he also have a database for from 219 countries. I think, and then I will also introduce Dr. Chang. He also presented yesterday. Professor Yongcho Chang from School of Business, Singapore University of Social Science. He worked as a landscape architect for 2 years in Korea and Saudi Arabia, and financial analyst for 4 years in Korea. So he received his PhD in economics from University of Hawaii at Manoa, USA. So I think I will give the floor to Professor Mehar first. Thank you, Professor Mehar.
Thank you, Nila, for such a nice introduction. As you have mentioned already, that my paper belongs to the impacts of the pattern of financing. I have trying to test that how different modes of financing can affect in different way to the infrastructure development. Here I hypothesize that different type of financing will not affect the infrastructure development in a similar way. Their effect may be magnitude-wise, they may be different. From direction point of view, they may be different in their effects. I drive this model where the target variable is per capita income. And I hypothesize that this per capita income is determined by the quality and magnitude of infrastructure. Quality and magnitude of infrastructure affect to the per capita, improve to the per capita income, and other control variable are domestic credit to private sector, how it affects to per capita income. Exports definitely affect to per capita income, and inflow of external capital. In external capital, I have introduced both It is FDI, foreign direct investment, and it is also different type of debt financing for development purposes. And then quality and the magnitude of infrastructure is again depend on some determinants, which is one of the target variable which mainly belong to this studies, composition of external debt. By composition of external debt, we included long-term debt to the public sector for development purposes, long-term debt to the private sector, and other is short-term debt. How these different type of debt affect to the quality and magnitude of infrastructure, and then infrastructure effect to the per capita income. We tested in the context of particularly CARIC country, but our data is based on World Development Indicator. I included data from 2007 to 2016 for some latest year because unavailability of data and some constraint for some specific country of some specific variable data was not available. So I restricted to from 2007 to 2016. This unbalanced panelist square, and I included 109 countries to test the significance of variable and to apply different tests for falsification and to check the robust in the parameters. I estimated in 4 alternative models. We noted in this study that domestic credit to private sector positively affect to logistic infrastructure. Our dependent variable is overall index of logistic infrastructure. Here, one thing is noted. I introduced a dummy variable for CARIC member countries. The reason is in CARIC member countries are used to their history reflect that they are still not used to the private partnership or private sector participation in infrastructure development. In those countries, it is the usual thought that infrastructure development is the basically responsibility of the public sector. Government usually invest in infrastructure development. So we noted this result here that in CARIC member countries, already we noted that infrastructure position is not very well. The negative sign associated with the beta of CARIC dummy variable in all 4 model, it is captured by here. Domestic capital credit to private sector has positive impact on infrastructure development. Similarly, public sector long-term debt positively affect. Short-term debt also positively affect. If government issue public sector debt bonds, sovereign bond have also contributed in infrastructure development. DBTL, LTPB variable reflect the public sector bond for long term issued by the public sector. Private sector's investment I have noted here, it is not significant, had not affected significant impact on infrastructure development. The same model again I have estimated in another context, and we introduced a quality of logistic infrastructure as dummy variable instead of the overall infrastructure. Here we included only quality of the logistic infrastructure, but surprisingly results are same. The beta associated with the CARIC dummy again negative, and a positive significant impact of domestic credit to private sector noted here. Significant impact of the short-term debt and long-term debt we noted here, but again private sector impact is not significant in this equation also. In second model, we tested how infrastructure development affect to the per capita income. In determination of per capita income, it was noted that logistic infrastructure have played a significant and a strong role in determination of the per capita income. Similarly, role of export was positive. Role of foreign direct investment inflows was definitely positive in all scenarios. Long-term debt, total debt impact the per capita income in positive way. In all scenario, it is significant and robust, which its robustness we check here. The same equation where per capita income is the dependent variable, we tested another scenario. We introduced quality of logistic infrastructure instead of the total infrastructure index. But the result was almost same. Export, foreign direct investment, quality of logistic infrastructure remain significant positive for determination of per capita income, and role of domestic credit to private sector was also played an important role in the determination of infrastructure. Based on these results, we concluded the most important conclusion was which derived from this estimation, this empirical analysis was the identification of short-term borrowing as most effective mode of financing. Similarly, results show also significant and robust effect of short-term borrowing. The strong and significant and robust impact of short-term borrowing in total external borrowing on income and infrastructure development indicate the pressure on public makers and economic managers for effective and efficient utilization of resources. Basically, in the presence of short-term loans, the managers have to show their role, their effectiveness, and their efficiency in short-term. They cannot transfer the burden of repayment and their policies on the forthcoming governments. That is the reason that short-term borrowing played an important role in the development of infrastructure, though it is a general thought that long-term debt are closely associated with the infrastructure development. But in this study, I have noted on the basis of empirical analysis that short-term financing play a more important role as compared to the long-term financing. Similarly, effects of domestic credit to private sector was positive in determination of infrastructure and determination of also per capita income also. Other than domestic credit to private sector, we noted that long-term external debt has played important role. But the surprising thing is there was no significant impact of private sector and external logistic infrastructure development has been proved. Bond for long-term financing to private sector was not proved as an important, which is normally a general thought that private sector play an important role in infrastructure development, and private sector can finance those long-term development through issuing of long-term bonds. In determination of income, quality and magnitude of logistic infrastructure, we have noted positive and significant effect of export noted on per capita income. In recommendation part, based on these empirical analyses, we have two types of recommendation. First, for international financial institution, we recommended on the basis of these results that global financial architecture should focus on the provision of short-term debt to improve the efficiency of development projects. It is usually thought that only long-term projects play an important role, but we noted here that short-term financing or working capital is also important for the development of infrastructure-related projects. For CARIC member countries, focus on improving the sustainable logistic infrastructure is required for improvement and their per capita income also. Because we have noted that per capita income as closely related with their infrastructure development. If there is a development infrastructure in their
I think you have 1 minute or.
Dr. Neela, it looks like he's frozen. We could just probably go ahead with the discussion.
Okay. Yes, I think Professor Mehar, I think because you're freezing, maybe I will give the floor to Dr. Chang first, and yeah, and then I will ask you to respond.
Okay.
Dr. Chang, yeah.
But yeah, okay, I don't know whether can I. Okay. Okay. So you see my screen, right? Okay. This paper by Professor Muhammad Ayub Behar, Impact of Patterns of Financing on Logistic Infrastructure in Current Member Countries. Topic is interesting. However, I have a bit difficulty in reading. Okay. So here's my general comment. The objective study, as he said, to identify the effective mode of financing. What do I do?
Derek, you could
Yeah.
probably, yes.
Yeah. To identify the effective mode of financing for sustainable infrastructure development in current member countries. The two main objectives: the effect of domestic and external funding to the private sector on infrastructure development and economic growth. Second is the effect of the quality and magnitude of logistic infrastructure on economic growth. So key findings. Key findings, first, external debt to the public sector is a significant determinant of the magnitude and quality of the logistic infrastructure, and why and how is a bit questionable. Second, the share of short-term debt in total external debt affect the logistic infrastructure positively, somewhat unclear. No significant impact of the private sector external debt on infrastructure development. This is interesting finding. The last one is, other than domestic credit to the private sector, the most important significant determinant of logistic infrastructure development is the long-term public sector external debt, which is an indicator of the government participation in infrastructure project. This is somewhat straightforward. So my comment and suggestion, first, model. There are many expressions in model and various pages. Page 14, the model. Page 15, two alternative model. Page 16, third equation, equation 4. And then finally, the model 1, model 2, model 3, model 4 in table 6, 7, 8, 9 are the same or different. Okay, I think it's far better for the reader to understand how the model is constructed in a separate section. And it will be more convincing to present the result in a separate section rather than in estimation technique. Estimation technique should cover only technique, not the result. And then it is more effective to present and discuss the result in a separate section rather than in conclusion. Conclusion should be a summary of the entire report. So now the data. The list of variables and data description source is not given in the main body. Okay? I think the appendix has technical glossary. If it come to the main or where data is presented, it's better. I found technical glossary to the end, last minute. So I have no idea how the data is described. And then quality variable, magnitude variables are the same or aggregated, or it can be separated. Okay, that's the question. And then estimation technique, again, 4 equations, but where are the equations? Equation form, I cannot find. And what are the supporting evidence of the relationship assumed of each equation? Or is there any behavioral justification? Figure 1 seems to show some, but it may not be enough. Then what are the basis of hypothesis of 2 models? Empirical evidence from other studies or theoretical justifications? Then conclusion. Some statement in conclusion, I'm not sure whether is observed from data or derived from analysis. Okay, for example, the indices of logistic infrastructure are much lower in current member countries, except the PRC, seems not to be the finding from the analysis. It's come from the data. Okay, then I have a question. How can direct investment was a significant determinant of per capita income? However, the present something be known. Now I think it's coming from table 8 and 9. Then presentation, I think introduction, and then the new section of literature review, then infrastructure financing and development, which is the current section 2. And then you have a data, model, and exploration technique, then resultant discussion, conclusion. Before conclusion, maybe partial recommendation. Then reader can find the easy to comprehend the suggest the argument. Okay. And current section 2 seems to be more appropriate for introduction, most of the statement. Finally, I don't see quite straightforwardly whether the effect of various financing models on economic growth is whether it's explicitly stated or analyzed. Okay, and two small minor T, we use low case, not the capital case, T statistics, okay, not big T. And then really last one, page numbers are missing. Thank you very much. I hope my comment helps you make it your paper better and more convincing. It's a very interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang. I think you give Professor Ayub Mehar very constructive feedback, and Professor Ayub Mehar, if you want to give a response
Thank you.
before we give to the floor. Yes.
Thank you, Chang. I appreciate you. Definitely, your contribution is. I will restructure the paper. Most of the comments related to the restructuring, and as you mentioned, I noted it that the definition and explanation of variable should be in the text, not in the appendixes. And other comments I have noted here, and I think your positive contribution, I will incorporate it.
So, Doctor, I saw the Dr. Iskandar. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayub Mehar. Indeed, very interesting paper, and already comments have been made. My just a small question is, mostly the infrastructure requires long-term investments, not short-term, because most of the time you need the long-term investments. Even today, we talk about water infrastructure needs years to construct. So how you link the infrastructure needs for investment, and you're finding that short-term investments are much better?
Thank you, Dr. Iskandar. Before I give Professor Ayub Mehar the floor to answer, actually, I want to ask the same question. You promote like to have a short-term lending for infrastructure financing, but we know that infrastructure usually long-term. So this will be a financing risk in the middle. So how you deal with that actually? So I think that's complement with the Dr. Iskandar question. Thank you.
Thank you. Basically, I have explained in the end of the conclusions and policy implication. I very in detail I have mentioned in my writing version, not in presentation, but in article complete. That basically there are several types of risk involved in those countries. In developed world, industrialized world, it is usually that infrastructure, long-term investment affects the infrastructure. But investor required some working capital or some bridge financing activities. Without bridge financing play an important role. So I have not denied the role of long-term investment. Long-term investment was also significant variable. But in most of the studies, we have been ignoring the impact of short-term financing. Sometimes long-term investments are available through bond financing, through bank financing, but in the absence of short-term financing, sometimes infrastructure-related project may not be initiated. To initiate those projects at initial level, we required a domestic credit to the private sector and short-term financing. So I have never denied the role of long-term financing. Long-term financing is important, but I have also studied separately the role of short-term financing. Similarly, I have studied the role of public sector financing and role of private sector financing. I have just segregated their role, not denied the role of long-term financing.
Ayub, yeah, okay, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Professor Mayer. Since we are sharing the same name, Ayub, and I really enjoyed reading your paper, and I believe you have my comments, the detailed comments I provided to you. Why I enjoyed your paper, because we do share some of the thoughts that you're just expressing there. However, I would just really suggest that, for example, I recall in some point you were just given launching some sort of let's say accusatory language towards local politicians who would use such investment schemes as political instrument to for their own political cause, and then at the end there's no investment or there's no infrastructure. So for that, since we're just really doing, I tried to give you some detailed comment there, because we're trying to do advocacy policy change, right? So we don't want to provoke them. But what we do is try to find ways to work with them, and try to help them. We understand this is not the way to go, and I would suggest that if you could work on that. What I really enjoyed about your paper was the originality of thought. So, and I like Professor Young Ho. I felt that you're trying to bring in maybe from different works that you have done, and there are different. I thought the linkage was needed, especially with the data that you're bringing in. So you could just really make this linkage strengthen it. At the same time, since Dr. Iskander is here, I would like you to maybe participate in one other activity that we are going to have with Central Asian partners. Dr. Iskander, that Silk Road, I think that's the session that you're leading is also related to what you're trying to, what your paper is offering. This is highly relevant. Dr. Iskander, if you could just provide some information on this upcoming with the Kazakh-German University, I think that is very relevant to Dr. Maher's research.
Yeah, I think we will send additional information, similar research forum where more Central Asian focus, not the Karek region, but these 5 stands. So your findings could be the voice out there, and we will invite you with pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, before I give, I want to emphasize what Dr. Chang mentioned, that in your paper, I mean, you should separate, I mean, the section for model, for the analysis. You know, in CBT, in our book, our audience will be a policymaker. So if you try to explain the model very long and in a confusing way, they're usually reluctant to read that. So it's more, so the policy recommendation, how implement that strategically, they will like that. So they will be useful for a government official, I mean, and then they will use your recommendation at the end. So, so I mean, restructuring your paper, this will be useful in this matter. So that's my suggestion. So we can, because we don't have a country presentation today. So is there some more question from the floor? I can open like for one more round question. Okay. So Ayub, because you manage this from the behind, and I receive a email, I receive a message from Derek, some country representative, they want to move the day. So they don't want to present today. So I think with that, I can, if there's no more question, I can conclude this session, and please allow me to give appreciation to our speaker and our discussion today, and then a very productive, fruitful discussion from discussant. Thank you very much. Ayub, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Neela. Maybe I take this liberty to give the floor back to Professor Mayer. I could just see you were trying to respond to some of the comments you received. So please be brief, and then we can conclude the overall webinar of the day.
Thank you very much. I have noted all the comments, and I will do accordingly. Thank you.
Dr. Mayer, I take this opportunity to just say that, you know, the pre-recording presentation you have shared with us has some background noise. If you could also help us to send maybe a clear presentation. Can you hear us?
I will repeat it, and I have noted all your recommendation. And
okay, all right. So with that said, if we are concluding our today's webinar. We just on behalf of yes, Dr. Nila, you want to say something?
I saw the Professor Yoshino just open his video. Usually, it's a sign that he wants to ask question.
Okay, then. So what we could do is actually
it's not the last question, but I'd like to say thank you for the presentations, and it was a very nice conference. And I hope all the presenters can revise their paper based on comments, and that will improve the quality of the book. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Nila, I follow your tradition. I gave the floor back to Dr. Iskander for conclusion. Then Dr. Iskander, please.
Oh, I was not ready, but still, also as Professor Yoshino said, enjoyed a lot of good presentations. And also would like to thank our discussants, making a very good points. And also editors have added a lot of good additions and suggestions to the authors to improve the papers. Overall, I think we really have a good set of papers today discussed, and they really cover different types from theoretical aspects of analysis up to the political recommendation and policy messages to be applied. I think it was a good discussion, and I myself enjoyed, and I would like to thank the people who also participate in discussions and made the comments from participants. We were expecting, of course, country representatives to make comments, and we are looking forward for that. This is a very important part of our work, making a linkage between research and policy. So I hope in the next day, 30th of September, day 3, we will have a lot of comments from countries. This is very important part of the workshop. I would like to thank today's organizers also. A good day, and I think we can say we did the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Iskander. We are always putting you on the spot. So our next, yes, Professor, yes, Dr. Nela?
You need to announce in the post.
Exactly, that's what I was trying to do, but now Professor Liu would like to say something, please. So it's okay. Professor Liu?
Actually, I thought you know, it's going to close, and I said waving goodbye.
Okay, all right, so no problem. Okay. So have a great day. Just to keep you alert, our next webinar is on September 30th. So this is not tomorrow. So this is because of some schedule clashes, and at the same time, we thought we should give you some time to breathe, because continuously 4 days of webinars would exhaust us all. But with that, my colleague Derek will be in direct contact with you and send you all these communications through email. So we are looking forward to having you on September 30th. And today, one thing I really noticed, maybe this was Dr. Iskander's presentation that provoked a lot of thought. We do appreciate active participation. We did have questions from panelists, and we did have questions from participants. So this is what we really want for our webinars, that is interactive, because ultimately this is a peer-reviewed maybe conference in some sense. At the same time, we are just really relying on our country representative and experts to provide some practical guidance in a way in exchange to our renowned scholars to shape their papers. So to tune them in manners that are good for policy advocacy. So Dr. Nela, we just close the webinar together, and by thanking all our colleagues, and thank you so much for great presentations and fantastic discussion, responses and discussions. See you on September 30th.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.